As usual, we're going to start with a look at global energy commodities and Brent crude. What is happening to our dear Brent crude? It's up on Friday to 79.6, but actually Brent crude has fallen to its lowest for about 2 months since July. And what's happening here? Concerns around the supply glut. We're getting now more supplies on the market. Countries like Brazil and the US are increasing their supplies. In fact, Brazil says it wants to become one of the 6 or 7 biggest supplies in the world by next year. So inventories there are up. So Brent down as a whole, even though we closed on a high, up 2.89% on Friday. Also on the close of business on Friday, WTI in North America was up 2.8%. Natural gas still a bit bearish, down by 3.89%. Significant drop in demand there as we come out of the summer months. But gasoline, RBOB, of course, up on the back of Brent. Let's look at what's happening in the Nigerian markets now. At the end of the last week day of trading on the NSE, we saw a slight uptick in the all-share index, up to 71,112.9. It was up by 12 bips. Not a massive move, but at least the value of trades was bigger than the day before on Thursday, where we saw trades at about 4 billion. Now trades ended the week at 6.03 billion. That's what, $7 or $8 million. And of course, the market cap at 39.1 trillion now. Let's look at Europe markets, North American markets. Euro stocks and all the other key European indices are up as at the close of business on Friday. That's good news considering some concerns around employment figures in the US. So Euro Stock 600 was up 98 bips, and across London, FTSE up by a whooping, at least in this market, by a whooping 1.25%, and all the other indices, Spain, Germany, and Paris were also up. Wall Street, what's Wall Street saying? Complete reverse here compared to Europe. Wall Street indices are down. Dow Jones Industrial Index, S&P, and NASDAQ Composite Index. So not a good end to the week for Wall Street. And if you remember, I was talking about the jobs data. So US unemployment figures and people reporting joblessness rose over the course of the last 2 weeks, and markets not responding very well to that. Let's see how that picture changes in the coming week. But Dow was down by 10 bips, S&P by 13 bips, and NASDAQ down by 0.27%. Well, my business top picks for the week, and we're going to be starting with Kenya. Interesting story here in Kenya, because Kenya's debt as a ratio of its GDP is hovering at about 67%. You can understand why. Borrowings are a challenge for the country. It's just secured an additional 600 million or so in approvals for borrowing from the IMF, bringing its total program with the IMF to 938 million. Kenya has been in the spotlight. It's been facing a huge liquidity crunch in the country. The government has been talking about slashing back the budget for next year, as I reported some weeks ago. So good end to the week for Kenya. It still has to do with its debt overhang, but this is not unique to Kenya. Many other sub-Saharan African countries are facing the same. News coming out of CBN is that the government's demonetization program, which started in December 2022, has been stopped. So the court had actually put on hold that demonetization program and said it was going to defer the cashless policy and the demonetization program to December this year. But now the CBN has now issued a circular and a statement on its X account saying that program has been halted ad infinitum. That's indefinitely. And of course, if you remember the impact of all the cash shortages earlier this year, there was a cash crunch, long queues everywhere, and problems with consumers with transportation. So I guess a relief to Nigerians there with this news coming out of CBN. Brazil has debuted a $2 billion sustainable bond. This is part of leftist President Lula's plan to make the economy of Brazil green. That debut was actually oversubscribed, with the order book reaching $6 billion by the time the bond had launched. The idea here is to fund green investments. The government has also said that it will look to raise additional money, climate funds for climate investing. Interestingly, the yields on that bond, the bonds feature a yield of 6.5. Years ago, Brazil already lost its investment grade status, and even though Fitch and S&P did say that the outlook for the country is positive, this move actually signals that there is appetite for Brazilian sovereign debt. So good news there for the government of the Lula in Brazil. Here in Nigeria, Titan Trust Bank, it's closing on its acquisition of shares in Union Bank, but not without some negotiations. It's had to up its offer to minority shareholders and will be paying them 13.4 billion, all the minority shareholders in Union Bank. Titan has about 94.1% in Union Bank. And the payment to minority shareholders brings the price per share to about 7.7 naira per share. That's a 10% increase from the original offer of 7 naira per share. So good news there for the shareholders of Union Bank, but it also means that Union Bank will be delisting, the company will be going private as a result of that acquisition. So big M&A moves there in the Nigerian financial services industry. And finally, news coming out of Nigeria is that the country is irrevocably withdrawing a civil claim against Italian oil giant ENI. Right? This relates to OPL 245. The civil claim would have come at a whopping $1.1 billion claim against ENI. This is around in 2021, an Italian court had acquitted ENI Shell and the former ENI chief executive of corruption allegations around the acquisition of oil prospecting license 245 and that asset in the Nigerian oil producing region. Now the Nigerian government has said that it's withdrawing its claim against ENI. So that brings to end that dispute, which had meant that particular oil prospecting license had been on hold, stagnant for almost a decade with no E&P exploration work going on in that asset. And that asset reportedly has, according to ENI's figures, 560 million potentially in recoverable reserves. So I guess good news there for ENI and potentially good news for Nigeria if that asset will eventually see the light of day in terms of oil and gas production. Well, that's it for my business top picks this week.